speak to us. A lot of you remember Louis from Vacation Bible School. I don't know if that's good or bad, but anyway, you remember. We're tickled to have his family help us and take care of us. And is that your wife? Flo, yes. We're glad to see her. Just tickled that they can be with us. But we're going to not take any more last time. We're going to give him time to start his class.
See, this is, yep, that is definitely on. Good morning, everyone. All right. Well, we'll hop right on into class. So a little about me. I am a forensic scientist with a TBI. I work in a lab every day, and I use scientific analyses a lot in what I do. I'm a very logically minded person, and I would say a lot of people in here are logically minded as well. And I start off by saying that because more and more today we find are getting away from, well, the Bible says this about this specific doctrinal issue, or the Bible says that about a moral issue, and it becomes more of, you still believe in God? You still actually adhere to this coping mechanism that's a little archaic, that science has disproven that logically you shouldn't really even believe in anymore? See, to me, that's the problem we run into, and that's what we face now quite a bit more. I can't say for this region, I'm not here often, although I have hunted many times and fished many times with the cherries, but I'll get into that later. But I have encountered more and more people, the discussion doesn't begin at the Bible. It begins with discussing if there's a God at all. And when you have those discussions and when you're going to have these interactions, you're going to have to start somewhere else besides the Bible, because the authority by which we ascribe to in the Bible, they don't believe in it. How do you have a dialogue? How do you have a conversation when somebody doesn't ascribe to the authority that you do? So, well, the Bible says this. Well, I don't believe in the Bible. Conversation ended, right? What I want to give to you today in this class time are my best arguments for the existence of God that helps lead to the discussion of the Bible, but it's outside the Bible. These are philosophical, logical arguments for the existence of God so that you can start where that person is. And that's a really important thing to do. Finding this common ground and starting where people are so that you have the best chance of showing them what we know to be true, right? So this morning, I want there to be a practical takeaway so that if you come in contact with someone that may not believe in God, you say, well, this is why I believe in God. You don't get labeled as this illogical, just ultra-logical reasons to believe in God. So that's where I want to start today. So that's how this works. The first argument that I would like to present to you this morning is the cosmological argument. And again, we need to have a ready defense, and I know I've already kind of got into this. I needed to click onto this first slide to begin with. But we are called to give a ready defense. The Bible actually states that we need to have a defense ready for anybody that we come in contact with to defend our faith. And this is a way to do that, especially with people now, again, more and more not believing in the Bible. We have some ways to reach them. So, how do we do it? Again, these three philosophical arguments: the cosmological argument, the teleological argument, and the moral argument. Now, I know there's some big words in there, some fancy words and whatnot. I'm telling you, there's some pretty simple core ideas that are associated with them that anybody can understand. So the first, cosmological argument. So when you hear the word cosmological, what comes to mind? Anything come to mind for anybody? Cosmology, right there. Yeah, I mean, that's true. Absolutely.
Like appearance.
Appearance? Okay. Well, when you take that word cosmos, what does that mean to you?
The sky.
The sky, the space, the universe, right, planets. when we think of the cosmos, we're referring to the universe, and we're referring to basically everything that we know exists. So the cosmological argument is structured like this, in a logical format. Everything that begins to exist must have a cause. The universe began to exist, therefore the universe had a cause. That seems pretty logical, right? I mean, that seems to follow. Got to ask the question, which came first, chicken or the egg? What was it?
Chicken.
Chicken. Well, why do you say that?
Man came first before the baby did.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right, because God created man first, and it wasn't a baby, it wasn't an egg when it started. Chicken came first, right? Now, this illustrates this next point. So this argument is based off the law of causality. Now, if you do any kind of science whatsoever, the law of causality is very much rooted within what we do, because we look at cause and effects all the time. Effects are generated by causes, right? The first portion of this, every effect has a cause, and secondly, the cause must be greater than the effect. The chicken came first because it's greater than the egg, right? It had no way to create itself. We, as weird as it might sound, we're all effects. If our parents did not create us, we wouldn't be here. That kind of situation. The law of causality is not disputed among the scientific community. That's another big thing I want us to realize. This is something that is wholly accepted and used within all realms of science. And I want to read you this quote. I never asserted so absurd a proposition as that something could arise without a cause. David Hume, he was an early philosopher and skeptic, which I don't like that a lot of atheists have grabbed the title skeptic, because honestly, you can be skeptical of things. I think we ought to be skeptical of things. It leads to study, it leads to finding the answer, right? So, again,
Because if we want to accept anything, we want to study one and find out for ourselves whether these things are true.
absolutely, you're exactly right. He made the point that God doesn't want us just to blindly accept anything that comes our way. He wants us to dig and find the answer, because if we do, hopefully we find the answer in His Word, right? Through that study of His Word. And that's exactly right. The universe is eternal. That was really the first proposition of people that didn't believe in a higher power. This was called the steady state theory by some. But basically they're saying, they did the whole back and forth question and answer. Where did that come from? Where did this come from? Because if you ask that question, there's a logical end to it, and there's really only two options that you come to. Either you believe A, something came from nothing, or something has always existed. Now, what's more logical to believe? Have we ever observed anything coming from nothing? No, absolutely not. I think it was actually Aristotle that said this: nothing is what rocks dream about. That sounds about right. Nothing produces nothing. It's the only thing that it produces. So, even if you don't ascribe to a God, an all-powerful being, you still got to believe in something you have a hard time wrapping your head around. You still got to believe in some kind of magic. You've got to still believe that something is timeless, that's always been and always will be, or you've got to believe something came from nothing. Now, when you get down to that level of this argument, now you can really maybe start having a little bit of luck, because you've got to readily admit this. And again, a lot of skeptics realize this issue, and so they just said, well, the universe has always been. The universe has always been here, and that's the uncaused first cause. That's an important thing to remember. An uncaused first cause that causes everything else. Okay? Now, along comes the Big Bang. How many people have heard of the Big Bang? I'd say everybody in here's heard of the Big Bang. Obviously, I do not ascribe to the Big Bang. I don't believe in the Big Bang hypothesis. I would call it a hypothesis and not even a theory. But here's some really interesting things that have come out of the science and why people think the Big Bang exists, okay? So I want to read you this quote. Almost everyone now believes that the universe and time itself had a beginning at the Big Bang. Stephen Hawking. How many people have heard of Stephen Hawking? Many of us. I mean, one of the greatest minds of our generation. I mean, he was truly brilliant. And he even says right there was a beginning to time and the universe. That's important. Why? Cause and effect. If there was a beginning of the universe, what was the cause? You have to come up with a cause if there's a beginning. Theoretical physicist, and he was an atheist at the time. Another quote, with the proof now in place, cosmologists, and not the ones that do the hair, the ones that are looking at the cosmos, astrophysicist type people, can no longer hide behind the possibility of a past eternal universe. There is no escape. That should be there is, not these. There is no escape. They have to face the problem of a cosmic beginning. This is Alexander Vilenkin, who is a professor, an evolutionary scientist, and director at the Institute of Cosmology at Tufts University. He doesn't believe in God. But you almost wouldn't know that by what he said, right? He's saying you have to face the problem. Why is it a problem? Why do you think that's a problem? And I'm asking you, why is that a problem? Why is a cosmic beginning a problem if you don't believe in God?
Because you have to have something to cause it. That's the ultimate problem with believing in the Big Bang, is that something had to be before it. So it's not the beginning. And that's what they struggle with.
That's exactly right. Did you have an answer there? Okay. And hey, feel free to participate. This is a back and forth, and I want, you guys to ask questions or participate. But you're exactly right. And when you read in the science books, and when you see the explanation of the Big Bang Theory, it goes something along these lines. And I challenge you not to find this if you go and you look up your general textbook at a school, that the Big Bang Theory at the beginning, all the matter was so dense it was about the size of the period on a page, and before that, there was nothing. I'm sorry. It becomes harder and harder and harder to believe that. And you want to call me illogical? You want to call me someone that's not thinking through these things? And I'm not trying to belittle anyone. I'm not trying to make fun of anyone. But the claim that Christians and people that believe in God are the illogical ones is just not a fair statement. And that's why I bring these up, is to show more and more people we can have even more faith outside of even just the Bible, what it gives us, because God created the universe and He's written a lot of these things within what He's created. And when we look at this, He says it. They have a problem to face. They don't know how all of this came into being. There is a beginning. And there's some actually good science. There's a lot of math that's very well documented, and it's very accurate. And what it's led them to believe is that there is a point at which all this began. Now, here's the thing. I don't believe in Big Bang. Now, there's an apologist that I like to reference sometimes. His name's Frank Turek. He says, you guys don't believe in the Big Bang? I believe in the Big Bang. I just know who banged it. Who's to say what God did when He threw the stars out into the cosmos? Who's to say when we see the expansion of the universe, because we see it, everything is moving out. There's ways to measure this. We've seen it. So, what if God decided to throw it out from where He was? And that's what Frank Turek's actually saying at this point. That's what we may be reading. And there's a lot that goes into that, and I'm not going to get into all the technical, like I said, astrophysics of it all. But the fact of the matter is what they're measuring doesn't really lead back to the Big Bang Theory, but it leads back to a beginning. And we know where that beginning is. Now, Albert Einstein's theory of general relativity states overall that matter, time, and space are independently interdependently relative to one another. They must all have come into existence simultaneously. That's a really important thing for us to understand, especially scientifically. If space, time, and matter came into existence all at the same time, having to come at the same time, what would the cause have to be? Again, if we go back to the law of causality, the cause has to be greater than the effect. If the effect at the beginning is space, time, and matter, then your cause has to be spaceless, timeless, and immaterial, right? There had to be a beginner because the universe is an effect. If this is true, again, has to be spaceless, timeless, immaterial, and going even further than that, this cause has to be extremely powerful. It needs to be a personal agent, able to make decisions, and extremely wise. Now, what does that sound like to you? What does that start describing? God. Absolutely. I mean, that's where it logically leads me, and I think it's led logically a lot of people. This argument does a good job establishing, especially the beginning point, of why we can have a good, logically and scientifically based reason to believe in God. Now, I'm not going to leave you without showing you some of the counterpoints that are going to be made, because if you make this argument to somebody, there are answers that people have come up with, and I don't want you to be unaware of those. So I want to go over the counter-arguments to this argument, okay? One of the first things that's always asked, and this is the big one, many atheists have mentioned in their books, if everything had a beginning from a cause, then what caused God? That's their big go-to. It's like, well, if you're going to say the universe had a beginning, well then, what created God? Well, and then if God was created, what created that God? Then you go into what's called an infinite regression. And that's a fallacy. So what would you say to that?
I would have to say I don't know if God was the beginning.
Absolutely. And what you're getting at is that He is the uncaused first cause. He's always been. He didn't need a cause. He is the necessary first cause that did not have a cause. Because again, we get right back to the crux of this argument that either you believe something came from nothing or you believe something always existed. And the scientists, before they get high and mighty and say, well, that can't happen, well, you used to believe that the universe was eternal. So, if you're going to use that argument, then you already fell down that rabbit hole. Okay? You've already believed that something's eternal. Another one is the multiverse theory, which means, and this one is just making something a whole lot more complicated to answer a question. The multiverse theory states that there is an infinite amount of universes out there, and that we necessarily come out of it because, well, there's an infinite number of them. So there'd have to be one that would support life. And there's this universe generator that's generating all these universes. Well, I got a question. What's the universe generator? It's got to be greater than the effect, which are universes, right? And there's absolutely zero scientific proof that there are any universes outside our own. This is an answer, it's a feeble one in my opinion, an attempt to circumvent their problem, again, as Valinkin has stated. But that's another counter-argument to this. And another one states this: this does not prove the cause for the universe is the God of the Bible. It could be the flying spaghetti monster. That's kind of one of their go-to terms. They're right. This argument does not prove the God of the Bible created the universe. But again, we're not trying to prove that at this point. We're trying to show people that there is a greater supernatural force that could be the beginning of the universe. We have other arguments to get you to why He's the God of the Bible, but we're trying to reach you where you are is you don't believe in a God. So why is the God of the Bible any more important to you? So these counter arguments I've all heard, And again, it actually doesn't undermine this argument at all. It's still very much a strong argument, and I really like going to it. So again, overall, the universe had a beginning, cause and effect. It's an effect. What was the cause? So any comments or questions on that one before we move on to the next one?
I think it's
Yep.
easy for us. I think it's easy for us to use these terms because we're used to talking about this. I've had relatively very few discussions with someone about trying to prove that there's a God, but when that's happened, I found myself having to be careful about using the term God because they think of God as little g. And so I would inherently find myself wanting to describe that being as opposed to call the God of the universe what I call him God. So I would say supreme being or supreme intelligent force or something so that it described it. Because that other individual, every time I said God, you could almost see in their eyes that they're thinking, well, that's like Zeus, or that's like, some Polynesian little g god. And it stayed in the realm of superstition. But when you started talking about, that there is something outside the universe that is supreme, that it's larger, and I found I got their minds thinking a little more in line with the logic of the argument as opposed to having to battle the vernacular or the vocabulary that I was using because it made it so common.
That's a really good point, and it's one I think if you dive into the last argument right there, it really gets at the crux of that issue, is that, again, when you use the word God, there are a lot of false gods out there that have been made up that we know to be false. And again, when we refer to God, we know that that's not the case. But when we're talking with other folks, what's one more to the fake, made up gods of these times? So using, again, maybe a little bit better vernacular or terms when you're describing this may actually get you a little further in the conversation. So that's a great point. Thank you. Any other comments or questions? Yes?
Another question.
Mm-hmm.
In discussing the Big Bang Theory, and they believe that, matter banged or whatever, but where do they believe that matter came from? Matter cannot be neither created nor destroyed, so where did that appear from?
Right, and we've got these scientific laws. The law of thermodynamics, right? There's the first law of thermodynamics, that matter is neither created nor destroyed. And that's why they said, all of the matter in the universe that we see was condensed into a little sphere the size of a period at the end of a sentence. And even then they said, and before that it was nothing. Again, they've got a lot of explaining to do. I agree. 100%. Yeah, I agree, and that's a great point. Again, they have a problem, a big one. And again, the reason why, let me go this way. When he said, with the proof now in place, cosmologists can no longer hide behind the possibility of a past eternal universe. Again, they are hiding intellectually and logically behind the idea that it's just always been. That's why it's here. But if there's a beginning to it, then you got to have a cause, and that's a problem.
Don't you think that God makes the best argument when he just says in the Bible, I am?
Well, and I think that's when you generally get there. You absolutely get to that point, and you can show that God is who he said he was, is that I am, that I've always been and always will be. But starting where people are, this is kind of where you got to start, because you got to show why maybe what they believe maybe not as logically sound as they may think. You've got to start where they are, but you finally get to that point, and I agree with you. So what were you saying?
I was going to say, I think we appreciate the memory of regarding God no matter who we're talking to. We can do be respectful. I think that we should own up to the fact that we believe in a higher being with the things, supreme intelligence or whatever. We just have to be brave in that.
I agree, and I think that if they wanted, a little clarification, you say, oh yeah, I'm absolutely talking about the God of the Bible, and I can show you why. But again, trying to circumvent, not using the word God, not because we're ashamed of it, but because it may help them understand what we're actually describing. And I think that was his point, is that we can actually get a little further to the God that we believe in if we use terms that help them get there logically. But I agree with you, we shouldn't be ashamed to use the word God because, hey, we believe that he's there. That is a name that we use to describe the supreme power of the universe. 100% agree. All right, well, we're going to just move on to this next one here. The teleological argument. So the teleological argument is the argument for design. And again, I know you're probably thinking there's a lot packed into this, and there is. You could have many lessons on just these three topics. But again, I wanted to give you these because I find them to be the three go-tos for me. Because I feel like you can really make some ground with them. So this argument is known, again, as the design argument. It states that the universe is fine-tuned for life and could not be a product of random natural occurrences or processes. Okay, so the other second law of thermodynamics, entropy, the chaos in the universe is ever increasing, I think is the technical definition of it, but things are breaking down. Things are actually going to a state of disorder from order. Has anybody ever blown anything up in here? My mom's raising her hand.
Did you say?
I said, has anybody ever blown anything up in here? Yeah, there you go. All right. I think we've all, either shot something, blown something up, used some fireworks, whatever. Have you ever had anything resembling order afterwards? Have you seen anything, if you blew up, let's not even say blow up. What if you take a chessboard and its pieces and you throw it? How many times do you think it would take before that chessboard would land face first and all of the pieces would land where it needed to land? I'd say all of us the same. And it ain't gonna happen. It is statistically far better there's a far better probability that would happen than a lot of the things that would have to occur for life to exist the way that it does today. I know that's a little hard to wrap around the mind, and some of the numbers that we are going to go over are a little hard to wrap our minds around, but I think that shows just how, again, statistically, if we say improbable, it's really statistically impossible that it happens this way. Again, I'm going to mention Stephen Hawking. He says this: if the expansion rate 1 second after the Big Bang, okay, now this means the expansion rate, how fast things were expanding of the universe, had been smaller by even 1 part in 100,000 million. I know, that's a big number. Okay, really, it's actually a small number. If it had been off by 1 in all of those millions, it would have collapsed before it reached present size. And on the other hand, if it had been greater by a part in 1,000,000, the universe would have expanded too rapidly for stars and planets to form. So by math today, he's already admitting that what we can see in the expansion and what he believes to be the beginning, had it actually been off by a just undescribably small amount, either way, we would not be able to have what we have right now. We would either be too close to the sun and would have collapsed in on itself, it would be burned up, we couldn't support life, or we'd be too far away. We wouldn't have the warmth from the sun that we need. We are in a very Goldilocks position. And this is even admitted by an atheistic evolutionist and theoretical physicist. Another point made: if the gravitational force was altered by 1 part in 10 to the 40th power, meaning there's 40 zeros behind this 10, stars would not be able to exist, and therefore neither would we. The gravitational force that we experience within these galaxies, if it was off by 1 in that many zeros, which, by the way, I believe it's actually not possible for you to count that in your lifetime if you were to start at 1 and count from 1 to that. You actually couldn't do it in your lifetime. That's how many zeros it is. The gravitational force was altered by just one part. Things would not be able to exist the way they do now. That's amazing. Just in these two examples alone, from an explosion, from something blowing up, we get all this order. We get this very, very finely tuned situation where life can exist. It's getting harder and harder for me to logically accept this. The position of the Earth, and I made mention of this before, is the perfect position to support life. The distance from the sun and the size of the sun, gas giants like Jupiter. By the way, thank God for Jupiter. I'm just going to go ahead and tell you that. Anybody know why? I don't know why you'd know why unless you're just really interested in Jupiter.
Gravitational pull of the sun, the gas giants.
Not necessarily, but what it does do is it shields us from a lot of asteroids and other space junk that would hit Earth had it not absorbed it, and a lot of it get taken out by Jupiter. Some of those spots that are on Jupiter are bigger than Earth where there's been asteroids impacted. That's kind of hard to wrap your mind around. But Jupiter, if it weren't in its position, catching a lot of all of these asteroids and space rocks, basically, we would be pummeled. That's just another little thing. Again, having a moon at the right size and distance away, a lot of different conditions have to be met for us to have life on Earth the way that it is. And look, I'm not even getting into the complexity and the interdependency of all the life that we see today. I mean, the fact is if we did not have bugs, plants wouldn't be able to exist the way that they do because cross-pollination occurs with a lot of bugs carrying pollen. Well, which came first? Probably plants. Well, how did they reproduce? Well, we don't know. And if we didn't have the amount of plants that we had, if we didn't have the kelp fields actually in the ocean, we wouldn't be able to be here because they produce much of the oxygen that we use. There are a lot of things that have to be in place together in order for this to work. Not over millions of years, one thing happening at a time. It doesn't work that way. I mean, you don't start riding a bike just by having a wheel. You got to have the whole thing working. It doesn't work. The system has to be in place all together for it to be functional. Yes, sir?
Perfect is not accident.
Perfect is not accident. Well, and I'm glad you brought that up because that's actually a counter argument, and I'll get to that in just a moment. And the last thing that I want to mention here, it's much like the first argument. What kind of time are we looking at? Okay, we're okay. The Law of Biogenesis. I know a couple of people in here know what that is, but that is a law, and it's one of the only laws in biology. But the Law of Biogenesis states that life must come from pre-existing life. You got another big problem. How do you get life? How do you get life from non-life? That's still not been answered. There have been a lot of experiments, and I'm blanking on the name of the exact experiment, but there was a scientist that tried to take what they thought the atmosphere was millions and billions of years ago. They took water and they took electricity, and they actually tried using electricity to shock to see if they could create anything within what the atmospheric conditions were and with water, and they came up with a few essential amino acids. You know why they're called essential amino acids? Because they don't naturally occur in our own bodies. We have to get them from other places. So even the amino acids, which are the building blocks of protein that actually come in the building blocks of everything, we can't even use them. We got to get them from somewhere else. They are far away from creating life. I suspect they're never going to come up with the answer because they're looking in the wrong place. God's the one that created life. They're always going to have this problem. So the two big problems, okay, where did everything come from, and how, with all this matter, when you find out the answer to that, how did it become life from non-living? So we had an answer saying, or we had a statement of perfect is an accident. Well, a counter argument would be there's some crummy design. There's some things about us engineer-wise we see there's a lot of crummy design. If God is the creator and designer of everything, wow, he really messed up. Take a look at your eye. It's got a blind spot. I mean, if he wanted us to have good eyes, why wouldn't he have just given us the eyes of the squid? They have a far superior eye to ours. I literally have heard this argument. Okay? Said, yeah, all the blood vessels are in the way. Well, do you know why the blood vessels are in the way? Well, the squid has something we don't, a big layer in between the UV light. It's got water. If the squid was outside of water, it would go blind in 3 days. That seems like a pretty good design method for me. And look, at the end of the day, who are we to question why God made us the way that he made us? Because look, this system wasn't meant to last forever. Again, what we can conceive as imperfect and perfect is not what God can conceive. He made it the way that he made it on purpose. And again, we're made in his image. Another one is, this only has to happen once. Yeah, you can throw out all these statistics at me, but all it has to do is happen one time. Okay. All I got to say is you've got to have greater faith than I do to believe that, again, the astronomical numbers I've just provided, and I kid you not, I could have had a PowerPoint 100 pages long of all the other statistical improbabilities with big numbers. When you add all of those together, it's impossible. But all they're going to say is like, we're here. So the numbers don't matter. And then again, to me, that's some blind faith that you've got to just assume that it happened. Okay? And you're already using something that you've accused me of using, blind faith. So again, when you start throwing those terms around, it gets pretty easy to turn it back around. This is what you've got to believe. What I got to believe is something that's always been. I don't have near as hard a time as this. If you need a number, those numbers are really hard to overcome. Okay, and for the sake of time, we're going to move on to the last one. Except somehow, wait a second. The last argument is not on there. Well. That's okay. I've got it up here. So, the moral argument. Now, this one I think is probably a little more palatable to everyone because we all deal in the realm of morality, a sense of what's right and wrong. Now, this one hits on an emotional level with a lot of folks, okay? This one, you're going to have to combat some of the emotional responses that you're going to get when you have the logical discussion of this, okay? Because in the worldview of atheism, at the end of the day, you really cannot justify a system of morality. I'm not saying you can't be a moral person as an atheist. I'm not going to say that you can't know what morality is. There are a lot of people that would do good things, but you can't justify it. Because the argument really goes like this. If morality, an objective morality exists, or an objective right or wrong exists, there has to be something, an objective morality setter beyond man. Because it really gets into objective versus subjective, okay? In the world of an atheist, it's subjective. What I mean by that is you, the subject, determine what's right or wrong. I, the subject, determine what's right or wrong. Does that not kind of sound like what society is today? Well, you can believe that, but I'm going to believe this. Well, you may think that's wrong, but I don't. Versus the object itself, it's either right or wrong regardless of what the subject thinks. Meaning, this is always right or this is always wrong. And where you can go with this, and this may seem counterproductive at first, establish something that's always wrong. That's kind of an easier thing to do. And one that gets brought up, and I've heard this too, is that morality from evolution is just a way that the herd and societies have better coexisted to propagate the species. So that society is really what determines what morality is. Well, if that's the case, then why did we denounce the Nazis for doing what they did? Weren't they a society that wholly believed that they were helping propagate a superior species over another? And if they decided this as a society, who are we to say that they were wrong? It's your opinion. It's no longer just that was evil. No, that's your opinion. You can't actually say it's wrong. That's some dicey territory to get into, and I think most would back away from it, even if that's what they believe. But here's what happens. And this is a counter-argument, and this is what we'll leave with. I know we've only got 4 minutes left. Okay, I'll grant you that. That is always wrong. Why would an all-good, all-powerful, all-present God that can't be in the presence of sin allow it to happen? And if he created everything, then he had to create sin himself. Answer me that. How do we have so much sin and so much pain, so much suffering when God created everything and he has the power to stop it? You want me to believe in that? I've literally heard that exact statement. How do you answer it? That's kind of a tough question. There's a lot of emotion that runs deep in that, right? Because a lot of people experience a lot of injustice in this world. A lot of innocence suffers injustice. We see it all the time. So what if somebody presented that to you? What would you say?
It's too simple of an answer, but it is the answer. But you cannot have a mountain without a valley. You can't have a high point without a low point. And ultimately, that works all the way back to God. God's put us here to choose him over this world. So what would there to be choose over if there was only good? If you can only do good, you're a robot. If you don't have the ability to do bad, if you don't have the ability to sin, then you're never choosing him over that sin. At least in my lens.
You're exactly right. And the way that I like to answer this, especially going right off of what he said, is I ask the question, is it inherently wrong to eat fruit? Is it morally wrong to eat fruit? Feel free to answer. No? Not unless God says don't. What was the first sin? Eating from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. We have to establish that God created us with free will and the ability to choose. He didn't create sin, but he did create the scenario where we could choose something that's not him. And sin is deviating from his standard. He says this is good. If we choose the opposite, automatically is sin. Now, to us, it's benign to say that we ate an apple. Oh, well. Well, again, it all comes back around to what is objectively good. Well, that would be what God says for us to do. On the world of atheism, there's nothing objective about it. At the end of the day, we're an accident. At the end of the day, we're wiggling dust. And really, at the end of the day, your life doesn't matter, my life doesn't matter, and so what I do with that life doesn't matter at the end of this. It's just like stepping on an ant. There's nothing that's going to happen with this life at the end of it. Why do we feel the opposite of that? Why do we feel there's injustice? With God, we have a purpose. There is a purpose for us here. He's given us that purpose, and he's given us a morality. The Bible even says it's written in our hearts. Every one of us feels that emotional response. I know we're right at the end of time, and I know we dove into quite a bit. Are there any comments or questions on all of this? And if you do have something that's a little more involved and you want to talk about it, come find me afterwards. We can have a discussion. But any final comments or questions? Okay. All right. Well, I appreciate it.